Hi, I'm Guy Mackenzie, and my hobby is collecting electric guitars, old ones, rare ones and unusual ones, and basses. And I'm actually interesting because I don't even play any of them, but having said that, to me they are works of art, and this is the history of rock and roll. I've been passionate about guitars since probably the 70s. I'm actually a drummer, and one thing we used to do in the bands back then, we used to guitar watch. And of course in those days we were always trying to get the guitarists to get American guitars because they were using British, European, even Dutch guitars. And this was the great thing, to get them to use Fenders and Gibsons. And we used to watch guitars, and that was really the very beginning for me. Apart from guitar watching, the reason I collected guitars was I got interested in guitars having read the Ultimate Guitar book, which to me was the definitive book for anybody who's interested in shapes and styles of electric guitars, written by my very good friend Paul Day. And also, years ago when I was demolishing a house in Cornwall, I came across this guitar. It certainly didn't look like this at the time. It was in large lumps, and actually small lumps as well. But over the year I researched it, I found out what it was. It is actually a Baldwin. It dates from about 1966, after Jim Burns sold out to Baldwin Organ Company. And we've restored it with the help particularly of Kiff Woods down at Perkins now, who is a very well-known guitar maker and restorer. Really and truly, my collection grew simply through an interest in guitars. I'd go around second-hand shops, I'd look on internet auction sites, in particular eBay, and I'd talk to people, and gradually it grew. I bought a number of guitars off eBay, international eBay as well. I bought a number from the States when the pound was actually quite strong against the dollar, which is not the case today for anybody who knows about these things. And also I bought a number from Europe as well, but of course from the UK. And the more I got, people would approach me. But I also bought a hardcore of guitars, if you like, from Paul Day himself. And one of them, of course, is this Star Force guitar, which is featured in the Ultimate Guitar book. I like it because it's pink, and let's be honest, every rock guitarist wants to use a pink guitar, don't they? My collection is guitars that I like, but it covers all different eras, right from the 50s to the present day. It covers different countries of origin, but in particular the Great Britain. And of course Jim Burns means a lot to anybody who knows anything about guitars in this country. And I've got two important guitars which refer to Jim Burns. One is this one here, which I will take out, and this is effectively the oldest surviving Burns guitar, and this dates from about December 58. It's very interesting. It was built just after he parted company with the Supersound, who built the very first commercially built solid electric guitars in this country, and that was in summer 58. And I've also got, interestingly enough, the last guitar he ever worked on, and this is a Burns Bison. It's an interesting one because this version of the Bison has twin humbuckers. It's also got the interesting headstock which matches the horns. As you can see, it's slightly offset, and the horns here actually curve outwards. So from that era, Bisons in fact, and there were very few built, Bisons actually were more machine built, and they didn't have this outward curving on the horns that this has got. So I've got the oldest Jim Burns guitar and the youngest, if you like to put it that way. And sadly Jim Burns is no longer with us, but Burns do carry on. Well, I've been asked many times what are my favourite guitars, and I have several, but this is definitely one of them. This is a Fender Katana that dates from the mid-80s, and they're very rare. This was actually built to take on Ozzy Osbourne's guitarist Randy Rhoads, who was the Jackson at the time. And the Jackson guitar the Randy Rhodes Jackson is still available today, but very sadly the Fender Katana isn't. They lasted for about 3 years. They sold very badly, but I love it. I think it's great, and it just fits in with my ethos of collecting guitars. I think it looks wonderful. I've been asked a number of times about stories of my guitars, and the strange thing is that nearly every guitar you see has a story. Let me take this one first. This is an Eggman Solid 7. This dates from the early 60s, made in Holland, and who today would think of Holland as being a major manufacturer of electric guitars, because they certainly don't anymore. But the interesting thing about this Solid 7 is actually not solid at all. It's a hollow body. It's got this very basic sort of screwed on control panel, but Paul McCartney's very first guitar was one of these. Now he had the slightly earlier model with a 3-a-side headstock, and of course because he's left-handed he played it upside down. But his first guitar was an Eggman Solid 7. I love pointy guitars, and this is quite an unusual one that I've just had set up ready for somebody, some likely candidate, to come and play for me on my YouTube channel. But this is it's built in, I think it's Korea actually, it might be Japan, and I should really know that but I don't. But this is branded Hohner, which is a British brand, and it's known as the shark fin, and I like it because of its style. These wild points, and it dates of course from the mid-80s when pointy guitars were the thing, as with the Fender Katana. Of course, I don't just like guitars, I actually like basses as well. And this is an unusual bass, and this has a great story too. This is a Vox bass from 1965. It was similar to ones used by many British bands at the time. The Rolling Stones, for example. Bill Wyman had a Vox bass at one time. But this one, a number of Voxes at that time were actually built in Italy, but this one was built in the UK. And the interesting thing about this, and it's not, as one can see, one of the machine heads doesn't match the other three, so it's not by any means in perfect condition, but this is how I got it. And I was contacted by a friend of mine in Scotland. He'd been up to his recycling centre, and he'd found what he thought was a Vox guitar with a funny shape. Was I interested in it? And I said yes. And I ended up with this wonderful, wonderful bass. This is an interesting one here, because this is a Burns wheel dating from 1959. And this was the actual instrument used by John Godfrey of the Mungo Jerry Band. Built in the UK by Jim Burns, with electrics by Henry Wheel, and Jim Burns and his landlady's son actually made these guitars on their kitchen table, and these were some of the earliest basses built in this country. But it's fabulous style. While on the subject of basses, I have to bring in this Dallas Tuxedo bass, because this was one of the first mass-produced basses in this country. Again, it dates from 1959, and this is identical to Bill Wyman's first bass, and he still has his actually, and he did put a cutaway in there, but it's actually on display in his Sticky Fingers restaurant in Kensington. And I remember meeting him at a private do, and I started talking to him about basses, and as I was talking to him, women kept coming up to him and trying to catch his attention. He wasn't interested in them. All he was interested in was talking about his instruments, and this was one of the ones he talked about. But he also talked about his Framus bass. It wasn't identical to this, but this does still have the same finish that his bass has, and he called that the humbug finish. And this is branded a Gretsch, but it's not for a Gretsch guitar. It's a very poor quality. It's a very basic guitar made in Korea in the 80s. But of course the significance of it is the travelling Wilburys, and this in fact was a promotional guitar for the band, and one of several promotional guitars were made. This has a single pickup, It just has a volume control, not even a tone, but it does have a vibrato. Some of them had single coils, some of them had humbuckers, some of them had 2 pickups, but this is the most basic one of all. But the interesting thing is, there are the facsimile signatures of the band as they were, as the travelling Wilburys were. This is not an AK-47, it is a guitar, and it was built to resemble an AK-47 at the time of the first Rambo films coming out, and I think it's great. It is actually a bog standard guitar with an unusual body, but I just love its shape, its style and everything, and that's the way it looks. And of course the trigger is your 3-way switch for the pickups. This to me is the most unusual and outstanding custom guitar that's ever been built in this country or anywhere in the world. This is the Blue Moon guitar, built by Brian Eastwood in Rochdale, and it was custom built for the band Shawaddy to launch their single Blue Moon in December 1980. Brian was commissioned to build a guitar. He was given 3 weeks to build it. The first week he couldn't think what on earth he was going to do to make a guitar that would go with the film. And the second week, luckily he had some help. A design was formed up, and literally the guitar turned up in the Top of the Pops studio with the paint drying, just in time to appear on Top of the Pops. Right, we're now in another part of my home, and these are some more of my favourite guitars. I do have, in various different places, around 200. This is a Guiatone LG50. This was one of the first electric guitars that came into this country, and it's built in Japan, and it was also a first guitar for Hank Marvin, and a first guitar for my dear friend Marty Wilde. And his, if you can see that poster, he's actually holding his in that poster. Just to prove that I don't have old, rare and unusual guitars, I do have new, rare and unusual guitars too. And this is an unusual one because this is actually a twin neck based on a Gibson. It's extremely heavy actually, and I wouldn't want to spend 2 hours playing this, but this is actually left-handed. And I've just had it restrung and set up, as I have got a young man in mind who just happens to be left-handed, who's going to do a YouTube video for me. This is a Super Sound. The body was made by Jim Burns. The electrics were by Super Sound. And this dates from late summer 1958. And I've never seen another, apart from the 2 that I've got, which are incomplete. But it's a very rare instrument and a fabulous shape. While we're on the Burns connection, let me go to the late 70s, the early 80s, and this is a Burns Mirage. This is a very rare guitar. It was the successor to the Burns Flight, which was used by various bands like Slade in the 70s. And this one, of course, the company went bankrupt just after they start building it. So nobody knows how many were made, but probably 20, perhaps 30. I've seen 2 others, a red one and a yellow one, but that's all. But I love it, and it must be one of my very real favourites. Finally, and I could pick out anyone here, but I'm going to pick this one, because this is a Peavey, and these are very highly regarded. Peavey was an amp maker in the States, and in the mid-70s they started building guitars. This is one of the first they made with twin humbuckers. It's very well balanced, but it's quite a heavy guitar. But players who've played it say that it plays beautifully. And of course, my great hero from the rock and roll days, Carl Perkins, he famously played one of these, although I do have to say that his had 3 single coils as opposed to 2 humbuckers on it. If you want to see any more of these, any more guitars of mine, and many of them being played, because don't forget, I'm not a player, I'm a collector. If you click on my YouTube channel, which is The Guitar Collection YouTube channel, you'll find many of the guitars I've been talking about today being played by some really great musicians, guitarists, bass players, and you'll also find interviews that I've done with well-known musicians and people involved with the music business. So please click on my YouTube channel, have a look at the videos, and if you do, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.